You don't remember the day clearly. There was no tension in the room. No sense that something important was happening. It was just a decision you made, the kind you make dozens of times a year. A choice that felt reasonable, logical, even responsible. At the time, it barely registered. But now, years later, it still shows up. Not as regret exactly. More like a quiet wait. A faint pause when your mind drifts back to it for no obvious reason. You're not angry about it. You're not stuck replaying it obsessively. You've moved on, technically. And yet, when you think about how things turned out, that moment still lingers. You can't always explain why. You don't tell yourself, that was a mistake. You just notice a feeling, a subtle tension. Like something didn't add up the way you expected it to. And the strange part is, you know you didn't choose recklessly. You weren't careless. You didn't ignore red flags or act on impulse. You chose what made sense at the time. So why does it still bother you? Why does a normal, everyday decision, one that didn't feel dramatic or dangerous, still carry this quiet emotional residue? That question doesn't demand an answer right away. It just sits there with you. And if you're honest, this isn't the only decision that feels that way. You are careful, thoughtful even. You weigh pros and cons. You consider the long-term impact. You pause before saying yes or no. You measure risks in your head before acting. Most of the time, this works. You pay your bills on time, you keep promises, you handle responsibilities. People rely on you. You rely on yourself. When you look back at the choices that still echo in your mind, you don't see mistakes. You see decisions made with care, with logic, with intention. You're not reckless. You didn't rush. You weren't careless. And yet, the feeling is there. That quiet tug of what if, lingering in a corner of your mind. It's not about failing. It's not about being irresponsible. It's about being human, capable, thoughtful, careful, and still noticing the subtle costs of the choices you once made. If anything, that makes it stranger. You've lived your life responsibly. You've done your best. And still, the echo of a simple decision follows you. Because this isn't a story of negligence. This is the story of someone like you. Someone careful, competent, reasonable, discovering that even the best decisions can leave a mark. You notice it first in small ways. A decision you once thought of as temporary. A project you said yes to, a city you moved to, a job you accepted, starts shaping your days. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just quietly. Your mornings, your routines, your weekends begin to bend around it. Meetings, obligations, errands, conversations, all subtly rearranged to fit the path you chose. It doesn't feel wrong. It doesn't feel permanent. And yet, it isn't quite reversible anymore. There's no headline moment, no sudden shift. It's a slow pivot you almost miss. But when you realize it, there's a subtle tightening in your chest. That's when it changed, you think. The choice that seemed small, even temporary, is quietly building the architecture of your life. And in that stillness, there's a flicker of unease. Not fear, not regret yet, just the faint awareness that some decisions don't just pass. They accumulate. You don't wake up one day and realize your life has tilted in a way that feels wrong. It doesn't happen with a single dramatic choice. It happens in the quiet, in the decisions that made perfect sense at the time. You upgraded your phone because the old one lagged a little, and suddenly your monthly bill crept up. You took the slightly more expensive route because it saved 5 minutes of commute. You didn't notice, but the little conveniences stacked, one on top of the other, like a row of dominoes slowly leaning toward a new pattern. Each choice felt harmless. In fact, each felt responsible. You were solving small problems with small solutions. You justified it internally. It's only a little more. It won't make a difference. I deserve this for working hard. And for a while, nothing seemed amiss. You were still the person who paid bills on time, who saved a little at the end of the month, who made sure obligations were met. And yet, there was this quiet drift, a subtle alignment of your life with options that felt easy but weren't neutral. Recognition is strange in moments like this because it's not a shock. You can look back and see each choice in isolation and think, yes, that makes sense. But when you step back and observe them as a whole, you feel the weight of accumulation. That's when it starts to feel like a tide. Steady, gentle, and moving in one direction without your explicit permission. The life you once imagined for yourself wasn't abandoned. It was slowly rearranged by decisions you didn't even think of as decisions. There's no blame here. No dramatic wake-up call. Just a quiet understanding. Regret doesn't appear all at once. It doesn't shout. It seeps in through the careful, reasonable steps you've always taken. And in that seepage, you start to notice a strange feeling. Your choices weren't reckless, they weren't bad, but they were quietly nudging you somewhere you didn't intend to go. That's the drift. That's how regret becomes invisible. You kept going. Day after day, step after step, you tried to adjust, refine, improve. You worked a little harder, made plans, rearranged routines, and tried to squeeze more efficiency out of your days. Each action felt responsible, logical, necessary. You weren't reckless and you weren't careless. You were deliberate, and yet, nothing really shifted. The milestones you had imagined didn't bring the relief you expected. Raises felt like small victories but didn't spark real excitement. Savings accumulated, but the quiet satisfaction you anticipated never arrived. The routines and structures you created seemed stable, but stability didn't equal freedom. The weight of decisions you made years ago, the choices you once thought small and harmless, lingered in the background. You begin to notice a pattern. Effort on its own doesn't always produce change. You can do everything right, follow the rules, check the boxes, and still feel the same heaviness in the quiet moments. There's no sudden revelation, no dramatic failure, just a soft, persistent unease. You feel safe, competent, functional, and yet something is missing. It's not guilt. It's not regret in the sensational sense. It's a calm, almost imperceptible discomfort. The realization settles slowly. Life doesn't always respond linearly to effort. Some things shift, some things don't. The feeling of stagnation is quiet but unmistakable. You see it in the small sighs, in the moments when you pause and realize nothing has really changed despite all the work you've done. And in that quiet observation, a thought forms. Simple, heavy, unavoidable. I did everything right. Why does this still feel heavy? Here you sit with it, calm, observant, recognizing that effort alone is not the measure of movement. And then it happens. Not with fanfare. Not with a crash of consequences or a sudden epiphany. Just a quiet thought in the middle of your day. I don't actually know what enough feels like. It's subtle at first. You notice it while making a simple choice, scrolling past a notification, or rereading an old email. A fleeting awareness that the structures you've built, the routines you've followed, and the effort you've poured in, they've carried you somewhere, but not necessarily where you intended. There's no panic, no guilt, no checklist to fix. Just recognition. You feel a strange mix of relief and stillness. Relief because it's not a failure, you've been doing what you thought was right. Stillness because for the first time in a long while, you're pausing to notice without needing to act immediately. The quiet clarity sinks in. You've been living inside patterns created by countless small decisions, many of them thoughtful, many of them necessary. Yet the question lingers, gentle but insistent. Where am I really going? It's not about a plan or a solution yet. It's about giving your mind the space to see, and for the first time in a while, breathe. You start to notice a pattern. It isn't dramatic or obvious at first. It's in the quiet, almost invisible ways you measure yourself. The decisions you've made, the routines you've built, even the compromises you accepted, they've all become a kind of proof. Proof that you're capable, that you're responsible, that you can handle life's weight. And in many ways, you are. You think things through. You adapt. You meet expectations, your own and those of others. You've made choices that feel safe, rational, even honorable. But somewhere along the way, saving became more than a habit. Following the plan became more than strategy. These small, steady behaviors didn't just organize your life. They started organizing who you think you are. You realize this trap is subtle because it doesn't shame you. It flatters you. It tells you that the problem isn't you. It tells you that you are exactly who you should be. And so, the structure grows around you quietly. Decisions compound into identity, and identity compounds into inertia. The discomfort isn't loud. It isn't a warning siren. It's the soft, persistent feeling that some part of you is waiting for freedom, for space, for something outside the identity you've carefully curated. You aren't broken. You aren't careless. You are exactly the person this pattern catches. And that realization, calm, almost tender, is the point where recognition finally meets understanding. You've been thinking about control all wrong. Not in a dramatic, urgent way, but quietly. For years, you equated control with outcomes, with perfect execution, with numbers adding up, with every choice being reversible. You believed that if you saved enough, planned enough, adjusted enough, you'd finally feel free. And yet, here you are, noticing the same patterns, feeling the same weight. That's because control isn't about making every outcome perfect. It's about noticing the direction you're heading, understanding the forces shaping your decisions, and giving yourself the awareness to adjust, slowly, deliberately, without panic. This isn't a lesson in more discipline or more effort. It's a realization. You already have more control than you think, not over the circumstances, but over how you respond to them. Each choice doesn't have to be monumental. Each day doesn't need to be optimized to exhaustion. What matters is that you see the structures you've built, understand how they shape you, and quietly decide which ones deserve your attention. The calm clarity comes gradually. You stop chasing false markers of success. You stop measuring yourself against numbers, spreadsheets, or arbitrary milestones. Instead, you begin to notice the subtle power in awareness, the ability to pause, to observe, to make the occasional course correction. Control isn't a finish line. It isn't a tally of achievements. It's a gentle, continuous alignment with your own life, your own values, your own direction. And when you finally see it this way, the heaviness you've carried starts to feel lighter. Not because life has changed, but because your relationship with it has. You don't need a dramatic overhaul. There's no checklist, no system, no extreme action required. Instead, there's a quiet shift. Noticing where your attention goes, what you spend time on, and how your choices nudge your life. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, you start to see patterns you hadn't recognized before. It's not about fixing everything at once. It's about gently realizing that you can choose, in small ways, in subtle moments, whether to continue following the structures you built years ago, or to adjust them. Each tiny change doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels like breathing again after holding it in too long. You begin to feel grounded in a way you haven't before. Decisions that once felt automatic, like paths you had no control over, now feel like options. You notice the weight of old habits lifting just a little, the anxiety softening, the tension easing. You realize you've been carrying responsibility like a burden when really, you were just unaware of the space you had to maneuver. This is not about perfection. It's not about creating a better you overnight. It's about quiet awareness, deliberate nudges, and reclaiming agency one gentle step at a time. You see that life doesn't need to be controlled rigidly to feel meaningful. It only needs to be observed carefully. And with this observation comes relief. You're no longer trapped by invisible chains of past choices. You can pause, reflect, and decide calmly, thoughtfully, intentionally where to go next. That's the real course correction. Small, subtle, yet profoundly freeing. You close your eyes for a moment and realize something simple. This wasn't a lecture, a wake-up call, or a judgment. It was a reflection. Every pause, every regret, every small course correction you've noticed along the way wasn't evidence of failure. It was evidence of being human. The weight of past choices feels lighter now because you see them for what they were. Honest attempts at living, decisions made with the information and feelings you had at the time. You weren't careless, reckless, or broken. You were simply navigating life like everyone else. Learning, adapting, and sometimes carrying consequences you didn't anticipate. There's a quiet comfort in understanding that regret doesn't define you. It's just a signal, a mirror, a way of seeing the path you've walked and the subtle ways you've shaped your present. You realize that insight, not shame, is the gift here. You've been given a chance to notice, reflect, and decide calmly without pressure, without hype. And in that moment, you feel seen. Not by a stranger, not by a guru, but by yourself. Someone finally put words to the pattern you've lived quietly inside, and that recognition alone is grounding. If you share this understanding with someone else silently living inside their own loop, it ripples further. Reflection becomes connection. Calm awareness becomes shared experience. You open your eyes and realize you were never wrong. You were simply human, and that truth, quietly acknowledged, is enough.